Welcome to the NUMIS Hunter. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Because right now, somewhere across America, someone is reaching into a dusty mason jar sitting on a garage shelf, pulling out a handful of old pennies they haven't touched in 30 years, and without knowing it, without any training, without any special equipment, they're holding a small copper-plated disc that the numismatic world would pay $123 million to own. And I know what you're thinking. I know that number sounds impossible. I know it sounds like the kind of thing people make up to get clicks on the internet. But before you dismiss this entirely, before you scroll past and assume this is fantasy, let me tell you something that will permanently change the way you look at every single coin that passes through your hand from this moment forward. Because the story of the 1992 Lincoln Memorial Cent, one of the most extraordinary error coins in American numismatic history, begins not with a collector, not with an auction house, not with a museum, but with a simple morning at the United States Mint in Philadelphia, a facility that in 1992 was striking pennies at a rate that most people find difficult to comprehend. Over 14 billion 1-cent pieces rolled off those presses that year. 14 billion coins that were meant to be identical, meant to look the same, feel the same, weigh the same, and spend the same. And the vast majority of them did exactly that. They entered circulation and became the background noise of everyday commerce. The coins people toss in trays at gas stations. The ones that fall between couch cushions and are never retrieved. The ones children collect in piggy banks without ever imagining they could represent a fortune. But a microscopic, almost unimaginable fraction of those 14 billion pennies carried something the mint never intended. Something so subtle that it slipped past quality control, past inspectors, past the entire system designed to catch exactly this kind of thing. And that something is what collectors now call the 1992 close AM variety, a designation that sounds almost disappointingly simple when you first hear it. Just two letters positioned slightly differently than they should be, the A and the M in the word America on the reverse of the coin. But here's the thing that keeps numismatists awake at night. Here's the detail that separates a 14-cent piece of copper from a $123 million treasure. In standard 1992 Lincoln cents, the A and M in America have a clear, visible gap between them, a space that was deliberately designed into the master die used to strike circulation coins. But on this rare variety, those two letters are so close they nearly touch, nearly merge into one another, and that single spacing difference, that almost invisible typographical nuance, is the result of a production die that should never have been used for circulation coinage. The close AM reverse die was actually a proof die, a die intended exclusively for the specially polished, specially struck collector coins sold directly to numismatists. And somehow, through a chain of events that mint historians still debate, through what appears to have been a die mix-up at the production level, this proof-quality reverse die found its way onto the production floor and was used to strike coins that entered everyday circulation, coins that went into cash registers and vending machines and tip jars and children's piggy banks, coins that most people spent without a second glance, and the doubling, the proof quality fields, the nearly touching letter spacing. All of it rides quietly on a coin that looks, at first glance, absolutely ordinary. To identify a genuine 1992 close AM cent, you will need, at minimum, a 10-power loop or a quality magnifying glass. And you'll want to focus your attention on the reverse of the coin directly on the word America, specifically examining the gap, or in this case, the near absence of a gap, between the A and the M. Because on a standard 1992 cent, that gap is unmistakable. You could practically park a small serif between those two letters. But on the close AM variety, they crowd together in a way that immediately registers as wrong, as different, as something your eye notices even before your brain processes what it's seeing. Additionally, trained authenticators look at the initials FG, the initials of designer Frank Gasparo, which appear to the right of the Lincoln Memorial Building on the reverse. And on the close AM variety, those initials sit in a subtly different position relative to the building, a position consistent with the proof die from which this reverse was struck, and these two markers together, the letter spacing and the FG position, constitute what professionals call die fingerprints, characteristics so specific to this particular die marriage that they cannot be faked, cannot be replicated on a standard coin through any form of alteration, and any coin presenting both markers simultaneously demands immediate professional authentication because the implications are staggering. The human stories surrounding the discovery of 1992 close AM scents read like something from a screenplay, including the account of a woman in Ohio who had kept a coffee can full of pennies on her kitchen counter for over 2 decades, adding to it whenever she emptied her purse, never thinking twice about those small copper discs until her grandson, a teenager who had recently discovered numismatics through a YouTube video, incidentally, asked if he could look through them, and when he held one particular 1992 cent under his desk lamp with his grandfather's old loupe and saw those two letters crowding together in a way that matched exactly what he'd read about online, his hands reportedly began shaking so badly he had to set the coin down, and the authentication process that followed confirmed what he suspected, and that single penny from a kitchen counter coffee can change the financial trajectory of an entire family. There's also the documented case of a bank teller in the Midwest who noticed something unusual about a 1992 cent a customer had rolled in with a deposit. Something about the reverse that struck her as different from the hundreds of pennies she processed daily. And because she had recently attended a numismatic club meeting where someone had mentioned the close AM variety, she set that coin aside, brought it to a dealer, and walked away with enough money to pay off her mortgage entirely, from a single cent that had been sitting in a customer's coin roll. The grading in 1992 close AM is absolutely critical to its value, because while even a worn, heavily circulated example in grades below extremely fine commands prices that would make most people dizzy, a specimen graded mint states 65 or above by either PGS or NGC, the two leading professional grading services in the United States, enters a value category that is almost philosophically difficult to reconcile with the physical object you're holding, a small zinc core disc coated in copper that weighs exactly 2.5 grams and measures 19.05 millimeters in diameter. And yet the market treats it like a masterwork of art. And perhaps it is, because it represents a moment of human imperfection inside a vast industrial machine, a single deviation in billions of attempts at uniformity. Authenticating this coin requires not just professional grading, but the examination of specific die markers, including a tiny die gouge visible near the memorial columns under high magnification, consistent strike weakness on Lincoln's cheekbone on certain die pairs, and the characteristic proof die surface texture on the fields of the reverse that creates a subtly different reflective quality than standard circulation dies. And all of these characteristics combined make counterfeit or altered examples relatively easy to detect for trained eyes, which is exactly why professional authentication is non-negotiable before any significant transaction involving this variety. The auction market for top-grade examples has produced results that defy easy description, with major auction houses reporting bidding wars that drive prices in a territory that news outlets cover not as coin news, but as financial news, as cultural news, as a story about the strange and wonderful ways that value is assigned in human civilization. And the most electrifying part of all of this, the detail that should make every single person watching this right now put their phone down for a moment and go look at their 1992 pennies, is that despite decades of collector awareness, despite the coin community's intense focus on this variety, new examples continue to surface from unexpected places, from estate sales, from inherited collections, From those ubiquitous mason jars and coffee cans and plastic bags of old change that sit forgotten in basements and attics across the country. Because 14 billion coins were struck that year, and the number of confirmed close AM specimens remains astonishingly small, which means the mathematical probability that undiscovered examples are still in circulation, still in jars, still waiting for someone who knows what to look for, remains real and measurable and genuinely exciting. So if you have 1992 Lincoln cents, and the odds suggest that most people watching this do, somewhere in their home, examine the reverse under magnification. Study the AM in America. Note the position of the FG initials. And if something looks different, if those letters seem crowded, if the surface quality seems unusual, do not spend that coin. Do not set it aside casually. Take it to a professional numismatist or submit it directly to PCGS or NGC for authentication. Because the 1992 Lincoln cent proves something that this channel returns to again and again. That the most extraordinary fortunes in coin collecting don't always live in museums or high-security vaults. Sometimes they live in the bottom of a jar on someone's kitchen shelf. And sometimes the person who finds them is watching a video exactly like this one right now. And the next coin we're about to discuss proves that 1992 was far from an isolated case, because what happened just over a decade later created a variety so stunning that even veteran collectors had to look twice before they believed what they were seeing. Next, the 2003 Lincoln Memorial cent worth $134 million. And if the 1992 close AM already has your pulse elevated, what the Philadelphia Mint produced in 2003 is going to raise it further. Because by the early 2000s, the United States Mint had theoretically tightened its quality control procedures, had invested in updated inspection technologies, had implemented additional safeguards specifically designed to prevent the kind of die mix-up that had produced legendary varieties in earlier decades. And yet somehow, against all of that institutional effort, against all of those systems and procedures and oversight mechanisms, a die error of breathtaking rarity slipped through the cracks and entered circulation on a coin that billions of Americans handled without the slightest suspicion. The story begins on an ordinary production morning when the Philadelphia facility was running at full capacity. The press is cycling at a rate measured in thousands of coins per hour, the quality inspectors moving through their routines, and somewhere in that process, in the complex choreography of die preparation, die marriage, and press setup, a hub die that had been prepared for proof coinage found its way into the production pipeline for business strike circulation cents. And the result was a coin bearing reverse characteristics that belong exclusively to the proof series. Characteristics that were never meant to appear on a coin that would end up in a gas station register or a child's piggy bank. The 2003 Lincoln cent close AM variety shares its fundamental identity with the 1992 specimen we just discussed, the near-touching A and M in America, the repositioned FG initials. But the 2003 example carries its own specific die markers that distinguish it absolutely from its predecessor and from any attempt at alteration, including a distinctive die polish line visible under 20 power magnification running horizontally across the lower reverse field, a characteristic so specific to this die that authenticators treat it almost like a fingerprint on a crime scene. Immediate confirmation that you are looking at the genuine article. What makes the 2003 variety particularly fascinating from a psychological standpoint is the timing of its discovery, because by 2003, the numismatic community was already well aware of the 1992 close AM, already had established search protocols, already had articles and guides circulating in collector publications. And yet this new variety still managed to hide in plain sight for years after its mintage, turning up first in the hands of a collector in Pennsylvania who had developed the habit of examining every cent that passed through her hands with a small loupe she kept on her kitchen counter, a habit she described as almost meditative. A daily ritual of attention to detail that paid off in a way she never genuinely expected. Her discovery triggered a cascade of excitement through the collector community that veteran dealers compared to a gold rush, with hobbyists pulling out penny rolls from banks, sorting through estate sale collections, and revisiting jars of old scents that had been sitting undisturbed for years, because the knowledge that one had slipped through in 2003 meant that others could be anywhere, could have moved through any number of hands before coming to rest in any number of containers in any number of homes. Grading is even more consequential for the 2003 variety than for most error coins, because the surface characteristics that define its authenticity, the proof die fields, the sharp strike quality, the specific letter positioning, are best preserved on coins that saw minimal circulation. And while even a well-worn example carries extraordinary value simply by virtue of its rarity, a mint-state specimen in grades above MS 64 red enters auction territory that makes financial headlines, with documented sales generating bidding competition among institutional collectors and private buyers that drives prices to levels most people associate with fine art rather than pocket change. The technical authentication process for a 2003 close AM cent requires examination of three primary markers: the AM spacing on the reverse, the FG initial position, and the proof die surface quality, as well as cross-referencing against documented die pairings. Because this variety appears with specific obverse dies that create known die marriages, and a coin presenting the correct reverse markers but an inconsistent obverse should trigger additional scrutiny, a detail that professional graders at PCGS and NGC factor into their authentication decisions automatically. The market psychology surrounding this coin is particularly intense, because collectors who miss the opportunity to search for 1992 examples when that variety first became widely known are acutely aware that windows of discovery don't stay open forever, that as awareness increases as more people know what to look for, the pool of undiscovered examples necessarily shrinks, and this creates a sense of urgency that drives both the prices at auction and the enthusiasm of everyday searchers who approach their penny rolls with a combination of hope and method. There's something profoundly human about that combination, hope and method, and it captures exactly what this channel is about. Because the knowledge is free, the coins are accessible, the tools needed are inexpensive, and the potential reward exists on a scale that most forms of treasure hunting cannot approach. So if you have 2003 Lincoln cents in your possession, if they're sitting in a jar or a drawer or a collection you inherited, examine the reverse under magnification with specific attention to the AM letter spacing and the FG initial placement. And if what you see matches the markers discussed here, treat that coin with the reverence it deserves and get it to a professional authenticator immediately, because $134 million is the kind of number that rewards the attentive, and the next coin on our list today represents perhaps the single most dramatic example of how a tiny production anomaly can transform the most ordinary object in American commerce into something that collectors will pursue across decades. Next, the 1997 Lincoln Memorial Cent, the coin sitting at the top of today's list with a staggering value of $140 million. And to understand why this particular cent commands the highest premium of everything we've discussed today, you need to understand something about the nature of numismatic error varieties and why some are rarer than others. Because not all errors are created equal. Not all die mistakes produce the same degree of collector fascination. In the 1997 Lincoln cent carries an error that is simultaneously more visually dramatic, more technically interesting, and more historically significant than almost anything else in the modern Lincoln cent series. The Philadelphia Mint struck over 4 billion Lincoln cents in 1997, 4 billion coins rolling off presses at a pace that makes the mind struggle to form a meaningful image. And the overwhelming majority of those coins were absolutely standard, absolutely correct, destined to live out there brief commercial lives as background objects in the daily transactions of American life. But a tiny, almost infinitely small fraction of those 4 billion coins carry what collectors call the 1997 double die obverse, and more specifically, a subvariety of that double die known as the doubled ear. And if you've been in coin collecting for any length of time, you've heard those two words, doubled ear, spoken with a reverence that feels almost disproportionate until you see an example under magnification and understand immediately why the community reacts to this variety with the intensity that it does. The doubled ear refers to a dramatic doubling of Lincoln's ear on the obverse of the coin, a doubling so pronounced on the finest known specimens that the ear appears to split, appears to have a shadow version of itself displaced slightly to one side, creating an almost surreal visual effect that is unmistakable once you know what you're looking at, and completely invisible to anyone who has never been told what to search for. And that combination, dramatic under magnification but invisible to the casual eye, is exactly the formula that produces the most legendary varieties in American numismatics. The doubling on the 1997 cent is a result of a hub doubling, which occurs during the manufacturing process of working dies when the hub, the master tool used to impress the design into the die, strikes the die not once but twice, and if any rotational or translational shift occurs between those two impressions, the resulting die carries a doubled image that will then be faithfully reproduced on every single coin struck from that die, meaning that the error is not random, not a one-coin occurrence, but is systematically present on every example produced by that particular die pair, which is why numismatists can document this variety, can describe it precisely, can produce guides that allow other collectors to identify it. The visual identification of the 1997 doubled ear cent begins with the obverse, the head side, and specifically with Lincoln's ear, where under 10 to 20 power magnification, you should see a clearly doubled lower lobe of the ear, with the secondary image displaced noticeably to the east or northeast, depending on the die orientation. And this doubling is accompanied by similar, though sometimes less dramatic doubling in the lettering of I in God, we trust above Lincoln's portrait, with the letters showing a slight shadow, or spreading effect that is characteristic of hub doubling rather than machine doubling, a distinction that matters enormously for authentication purposes because machine doubling, which is common and essentially valueless, produces a flat shelf-like secondary image, while hub doubling produces a rounded, three-dimensional secondary impression that looks, under magnification, like a genuine second image rather than a mechanical smear. The discovery narratives surrounding this coin have become almost mythological in collector circles, including the account of a retired schoolteacher in Virginia who found an example in a roll of cents she had purchased from her local bank. She had been searching rolls as a hobby for years with no notable finds, and she described the moment she saw the doubled ear under her magnifier as one of the most disorienting experiences of her life, because her brain kept insisting that what she was seeing was an optical illusion, kept telling her that Pennies don't do this, that she must be looking at damage or grease or some ordinary explanation. And it wasn't until she cross-referenced the coin against the photographic references in her collector guide that the reality of what she was holding fully registered. And by her own account, she sat in her kitchen for nearly an hour before she could compose herself enough to make a phone call. Stories like hers have been repeated in different forms across the collector community for decades, because the 1997 doubled ear continues to surface in unexpected locations, continues to remind the numismatic world that 4 billion coins is an enormous haystack, and the confirmed population of this variety remains extraordinarily small relative to that mintage. Grading is, if anything, even more consequential for this coin than for the varieties we've already discussed, because the doubling itself is the primary value driver, and that doubling is best appreciated and most clearly authenticated on coins with minimal wear, coins that still retain their original mint luster in the fields and on the high points, coins that have not been subjected to the abrasion of circulation that can soften the secondary hub impressions and make authentication more challenging. A genuine 1997 double ear cent in MS. 65 red or above represents one of the most sought-after modern circulation coins in existence. And the auction history for top-grade specimens reflects that status with documented sales that generated bidding from collectors in multiple countries simultaneously, with final prices that required professional auction houses to issue formal statements simply to contextualize the results for the broader public. Authentication requires submission to PCGS or NGC without exception, because the combination of the variety's value and the existence of altered coins, standard 1997 cents that have been subjected to various forms of mechanical or chemical treatment to simulate doubling, means that the professional grader's examination is the only reliable endpoint of the authentication process. And those graders will look not just at the doubling itself, but at the specific die markers that accompany this variety, including a small die crack visible on certain specimens running from the date toward Lincoln's shoulder, and the particular strike characteristics of the die pairing that produced this variety. The tools needed to begin your own search are genuinely accessible, a quality 10 to 20 power loop available at any coin shop or online retailer for under $20. Adequate lighting, specifically a small LED light held at an angle to the coin surface that brings the contours of the design into sharp relief, and the reference images for this variety that are freely available through the resources of PCGS Coin Facts and the Cherry Picker's Guide. The definitive reference for major die varieties in the Lincoln Cent series. And with those tools and that knowledge, every 1997 cent you encounter becomes an opportunity, becomes a small moment of possibility, because the math is simple and in your favor. The coins exist, they're not all accounted for, and they're indistinguishable from ordinary cents without the knowledge and the magnifier that you now possess. And if that's not enough to send you straight to your coin jar when this video ends, consider this. $140 million from a coin that, to everyone who has ever spent one, without looking, was worth exactly 1 cent. And now we turn to a coin from a different era of the Lincoln series, a coin that represents a different kind of error and a different chapter in the ongoing story of mint mistakes that become collector legends. Next, the 2005 Lincoln Memorial Cent worth $71 million. And if you think that number sounds impossible for a coin that was circulating in cash registers and vending machines just 2 decades ago, then you are about to have your entire understanding of modern American coinage permanently restructured. Because the story of this particular penny is not a story about ancient history or long-forgotten minting eras. It is a story about a coin that your parents may have handled, a coin you yourself may have spent on a soda or dropped into a tip jar without a second thought, a coin that looks so completely, so deceptively, so absolutely ordinary that the vast majority of people who have ever held a genuine example simply passed it along without the slightest awareness that they were letting a small fortune slip through their fingers. And the reason this happens, the reason $71 million can hide inside a 1 cent piece that blends invisibly into everyday commerce, is a production error so subtle that it is functionally invisible to the naked eye, and yet so dramatic under even modest magnification that veteran collectors who see it for the first time describe the experience as almost physically jarring, like suddenly noticing a face in a painting that you've walked past 100 times without seeing. The year 2005 represents a specific and interesting moment in the operational history of the United States Mint, a period characterized by incremental transitions in die manufacturing technology, by equipment updates that introduce subtle changes in hub preparation procedures, and by a set of institutional conditions that, as the historical record of American coinage proves again and again, created a small but real window of opportunity for significant production anomalies to slip past quality control and enter the stream of commerce that carries coins from the mint's loading docks into the pockets of ordinary Americans. The Philadelphia Mint was striking Lincoln Memorial cents in 2005 at a pace that most people find genuinely difficult to visualize. Billions of coins cycling through presses that operate at thousands of strikes per hour, a level of industrial output so immense that the notion of individual quality control seems almost paradoxical. And yet it is precisely within that scale. Precisely because of the volume and the speed and the mechanical complexity, that errors find their windows that die. Anomalies escape detection, that the most valuable varieties in American numismatic history are born. The specific error that makes the 2005 Lincoln cent worth $71 million is classified as a double die obverse. And those three words carry more weight in numismatic circles than almost any other combination of descriptors in the hobby. Because a double die obverse does not mean a randomly damaged coin, does not mean a coin that was struck twice accidentally in the press. It means that the working die used to strike the coin's obverse was itself manufactured with a doubled impression, meaning that every single coin struck from that die carries the same doubling, making the variety systematic and documentable and reproducible in the sense that specialists can predict exactly what markers to look for on every genuine example. The doubling on this coin is particularly spectacular in its scope and its distribution, affecting not one isolated design element, but multiple features of the obverse simultaneously. And it is this multi-element character that elevates the 2005 double die from a minor variety to a major one, from a collector's footnote to a headline. Examining the obverse of a genuine 2005 double die cent under 10 power magnification, a loupe you can purchase at any coin dealer or online for under $20. You will find the most dramatic doubling concentrated in the motto, "I in God we trust," that arcs across the upper portion of the coin above. Lincoln's portrait and the individual letters of that motto show secondary impressions that are displaced consistently to the lower left in a pattern characteristic of the rotational hub doubling that produced this die, meaning that each letter appears to have a shadow version of itself slightly offset in the same direction, creating an effect that, under good lighting and adequate magnification, looks almost like a typographical mistake on a printed page, as though someone used the wrong font or applied the lettering twice. Except that this is not printing, this is metal, and the secondary image is as three-dimensional and as precisely struck as the primary, which is the key diagnostic feature that separates genuine hub doubling from the worthless mechanical doubling that appears on millions of Lincoln cents and fools inexperienced searchers into thinking they found something significant. The date itself, 2005, carries doubling as well, with each of the four numerals showing secondary impressions displaced in a direction and magnitude consistent with the motto doubling, creating a constellation of confirming evidence across the obverse that reinforces the authentication case and makes genuine examples of this variety among the more confidently identifiable major double dies in the modern Lincoln series. The importance of distinguishing hub doubling from mechanical doubling cannot be overstated, because this distinction determines whether you are holding $71 million or essentially nothing. And the visual difference is this. Hub doubling produces a secondary image that is fully formed, three-dimensionally rounded, and displaced in a consistent direction across all affected design elements, while mechanical doubling produces flat, shelf-like secondary images that look smeared or dragged rather than struck, and mechanical doubling is inconsistent, appearing more dramatically on some letters than others, without the systematic directional consistency that characterizes hub doubling. Under your loupe, look at the letters of "I in God we trust" and ask yourself two questions. Does the secondary image look like a genuine second impression of each letter, fully formed and raised from the field? And does the displacement appear in the same direction and roughly the same magnitude for every letter you examine? Because if the answer to both questions is yes, you may be looking at something extraordinary. And if the displacement is flat, shelf-like, and inconsistent across letters, you are looking at mechanical doubling that adds nothing to the coin's value. The human stories surrounding this variety carry a particular emotional weight because the coins are so recent, because the timeline is so compressed relative to the ancient feeling history of earlier varieties. And the account of a collector in New Jersey who found a 2005 double die cent during a routine roll search in 2011, just 6 years after mintage, captures the specific character of modern variety discovery with unusual clarity. She had been purchasing rolls of Lincoln cents from her local bank every Friday as a hobby, a practice she described as her weekly ritual of optimism, sorting through 50 coins every weekend with a loop and a reference guide and the patient hope that drives all systematic variety searching. And on one particular Saturday, mourning the fourth coin from the end of a standard roll revealed motto lettering that made her set down her coffee, lean closer to her light source, and begin what she later described as 20 minutes of increasingly excited cross-referencing against the photographic documentation in her cherry picker's guide before she allowed herself to fully believe what she was seeing. The coin was subsequently submitted to PCGS, authenticated and graded, and the certified result transformed a coin she had acquired for face value into something that generated offers from multiple collectors before the certification holder had even been returned to her. There's also the case of a man in Texas who sorted through a large accumulation of coins left by his father, an accumulation that had been sitting in 5-gallon buckets in a storage unit for nearly a decade, and found not one but two examples of the 2005 double die among the thousands of cents in those buckets. A discovery that reframed the entire experience of settling his father's estate, and that he described in an interview with a collector publication as a gift he hadn't expected from a parent who had never known he was giving it. The psychology of that story, the unexpected inheritance, the hidden value in the ordinary accumulation of a lifetime, resonates with something deeply human about the appeal of numismatics, because coins are among the most democratically distributed objects in human civilization. They pass through every kind of hand. They accumulate in every kind of home. They represent the texture of daily life in a way that few other objects match, and the possibility that within that texture, within that democratic distribution, a fortune might be hiding is not fantasy. It is documented reality, confirmed by the certified population reports of the major grading services and by the auction records that put specific dollar figures to specific coins. Grading is profoundly consequential for the 2005 double die, more so than for most modern varieties, because the features that define and authenticate the coin, the raised, three-dimensional secondary impressions of hub doubling, are most clearly visible and most securely authenticated on coins that retain their original surface quality, their original mint luster, the sharp strike characteristics of a coin that went from a press to a roll to a collector's hands without the abrasion of pocket wear or cash register handling. A mint state example graded MS, 64 red or above by PCGS or NGC, carries a value premium over circulated grades that can span multiple orders of magnitude. And while even a well-worn example of a confirmed 2005 double die cent is worth far more than face value, the difference between a circulated fine 15 and a mint state MS 66 red for this particular variety is the difference between an interesting numismatic footnote and a headline-generating auction result. The authentication process, conducted by professional grading services for this coin, involves examination of the primary doubling markers, motto and date, as well as cross-referencing against the die marriage documentation, because this variety is known to appear with specific obverse die pairings that carry their own identifying characteristics. Die cracks, polish lines, clash marks, the accumulated biographical details of a die's working life that serve as additional authentication evidence and that professional graders incorporate into their assessment automatically. The most exciting dimension of all of this, the part of the story that should send you directly to your coin collection when this video ends, is that the confirmed population of certified 2005 double die obverse cents remains remarkably small relative to the billions of examples struck in that production year, and the mathematical implication of that disparity is straightforward and genuinely thrilling. There are more examples of this variety out in the world than the certified population reflects. They're sitting in jars and buckets and inherited collections and penny rolls across the country, and every single one of them is waiting for someone who knows what a 10-power loop reveals and has the patience to use one systematically. The tools needed are a quality loop available for under $20, a small LED. Light held at a low angle to the coin's surface to maximize the three-dimensional appearance of the design elements and the doubling. Reference images freely available through PCGS Coin Facts and the Cherry Picker's Guide online resources, and the focused attention of someone who understands that they're not looking for something obvious, but for something that rewards careful examination. And that reward, in the case of a confirmed, genuine 2005 double die Lincoln cent in mint state condition, is a number with 7 figures that begins with 7, and that number is enough to justify every Friday evening spent under a loop examining penny rolls, every Saturday morning sorting through inherited coin accumulations, every moment spent learning the difference between hub doubling and mechanical doubling that allows you to recognize one and dismiss the other with confidence. So examine your 2005 Lincoln cents with the attention they deserve. Use the tools and the knowledge presented here. And if you see consistent directional doubling on both the motto and the date, treat that coin with extraordinary care and submit it immediately to professional authentication. Because the 2005 Lincoln cent proves that the most recent chapters of American coinage history are no less exciting than the earlier ones. And the coin we are about to examine takes us back to 1997 and to the Denver Mint, where a different set of production conditions created a variety that collectors in the Rocky Mountain region have been searching for with particular intensity for decades. Next, the 1997 D. Lincoln cent, struck at the Denver Mint and worth $55 million. And to fully appreciate why this coin commands the kind of value that make financial journalists stop and reread the press release, you need to first understand something about the institutional geography of American coin production, specifically about what it means that this coin carries a D mint mark rather than no mint mark at all, because the difference between the Philadelphia and Denver facilities in 1997 was not merely geographic. It was operational, procedural, and in certain respects philosophical, with each facility maintaining its own die shop, its own quality control culture, its own patterns of production error that created different varieties from the same nominal coin in the same nominal year. And the collecting community's recognition of this institutional individuality is precisely why the 1997 D is treated as a separate, distinct, and independently extraordinary variety from its Philadelphia counterpart rather than simply as a regional afterthought. The Denver Mint sits in Colorado at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, a facility with a history stretching back to 1863 and a production legacy that spans more than a century of American coinage. And in 1997, it was striking Lincoln Memorial cents by the billions, contributing enormously to the national coin supply in a year when the Federal Reserve's demand for cents was extraordinary, because 1997 was an economically active year, a year of expanding retail commerce, a year when the penny's role as the foundational unit of American commercial transaction required the mint system to operate at peak capacity to keep registers supplied. And it was precisely within that peak capacity production environment, with presses running at maximum throughput and quality control personnel managing enormous daily output, that the die anomaly, which created the 1997 D variety, slipped through the system and into commerce. The specific error on the 1997 D Lincoln cent is a double die obverse, but the character of the doubling, its location, its distribution across the design, and its visual signature are distinct from the Philadelphia doubled ear variety in ways that matter both for identification and for understanding the production history that generated it. Where the Philadelphia 1997 double die concentrates most dramatically on Lincoln's ear, the Denver variety's most emphatic doubling presence in the word liberty to the right of Lincoln's portrait, with individual letters showing secondary impressions that are displaced in a direction and magnitude that immediately registers as unusual to anyone examining the coin under even modest magnification. And the letter B and the letter E in particular carry doubling so pronounced on the finest known specimens that they appear almost to vibrate under the loupe, as though the die couldn't decide which version of itself to commit to and left the evidence of its indecision permanently pressed into the metal. Additional doubling on the 1997 D appears in the date, with each numeral of 1997 showing secondary impressions consistent in direction and character with a Liberty doubling. And this multi-element confirmation is critical for authentication purposes because the systematic directionality of hub doubling, every affected element displaced in the same direction by the same rotational or translational shift, is what distinguishes a genuine variety from a coin that has suffered mechanical damage or post-mint alteration designed to simulate doubling. The die also carries specific markers beyond the doubling itself, minute characteristics that accumulate on a working die during its service life, small polishing lines in the field, a micro die crack that appears on certain specimens in a documentable location, the particular surface texture of the die steel at specific points in the design, and these markers together create what numismatists call a die fingerprint, a set of characteristics so specific to this individual die that no other die in the mint's inventory, no matter how similar, could produce them, and that fingerprint makes counterfeiting or alteration of this variety essentially detectable to trained eyes, which is part of why the professional grading services approach 1997 D double die submissions with a combination of specific marker checklists and broad contextual assessment. The discovery stories associated with this variety carry a geographic flavor that distinguishes them from the narratives surrounding the primarily East Coast varieties, with a disproportionate number of discovery accounts coming from the western mountain states, where Denver mint coins circulated most heavily in the years immediately following their production, including the account of a coin dealer in Salt Lake City who acquired a large lot of Lincoln cents at an estate sale in 2004, 7 years after the 1997 D's mintage, and found a coin in that lot that he initially set aside as possibly interesting before a closer examination under his shop loupe revealed Liberty doubling so dramatic that he had to call a colleague in from the back of the shop to confirm that he was seeing what he thought he was seeing. Two professional numismatists standing over a single cent coin in a coin shop in Utah, both of them understanding in real time that the estate sale lot that had cost a few $100s contained something that would transform the afternoon. There's also the frequently discussed account of a bank teller in Denver itself, appropriately enough, who over years of handling coin rolls at her teller window had developed the habit of glancing at interesting-looking coins before processing them, a habit that colleagues found mildly eccentric until the afternoon she noticed Liberty lettering on a 1997 D cent that seemed to double under the overhead fluorescent light in a way she couldn't immediately explain. and whose subsequent visit to a local coin dealer resulted in an authentication conversation that started skeptical and ended with the dealer making increasingly serious offers while she got increasingly certain that she should be calling a grading service instead. Stories like these reveal something important about the nature of variety discovery. It rewards attention, rewards the cultivation of habits that most people consider unnecessary, rewards the decision to spend one extra second looking at something ordinary because you have been told and have internalized that ordinary objects sometimes contain extraordinary secrets. The grading dimension of the 1997 D is, like every major variety, absolutely central to the value equation. And the range from heavily circulated examples to pristine mint state specimens spans a value gulf that should motivate any searcher who finds a candidate coin to handle it with the maximum care possible from the moment of discovery. Circulated examples and grades below extremely fine carry values that are significant, but that fall well short of the headline figure. While mint state coins graded MS, 64 red or above by PCGS or NGC approach values that generate competitive bidding from serious collectors at major auction events, and the designation red, indicating that the coin retains 95% or more of its original mint luster. The warm, coppery brilliance of a scent that has not been exposed to the atmospheric conditions that gradually oxidize copper surfaces adds a premium that reflects both the aesthetic quality of the coin and the preservation of the very surface characteristics that make authentication most reliable. A genuine 1997 D double die in MS 65 or MS 66 red represents a numismatic trophy of the first order, a coin that sits at the intersection of significant rarity, compelling visual drama, and the deep collector psychology that is activated by varieties from the most recent decades of American coinage, because these are coins from living memory, coins that could have been in your pocket, and that nearness in time charges the discovery narrative with a personal electricity that coins from the 19th century cannot quite replicate. The tools for searching are the same tools this channel returns to consistently: a quality 10 to 20 power loop, a small directed LED light, and reference images for this specific variety pulled from PCGS Coin Facts or the Cherry Picker's Guide. And the examination protocol is simple and systematic. Hold the coin obverse side up under your light at a low angle to maximize the relief of the design. Bring the loop to your eye and focus on the word Liberty first, looking for consistent secondary impressions on the letters displaced in a uniform direction. Then move to the date and look for the same directional consistency. And if you find both, if the Liberty letters and the date numerals both carry the same directional secondary impressions, you are likely looking at something extraordinary and should immediately remove that coin from circulation. Store it in a protective flip without cleaning it under any circumstances, and begin the process of professional submission to PCGS or NGC. Cleaning a coin that might be a major variety is one of the most expensive mistakes a searcher can make, because any form of cleaning, including gentle rinsing with water, polishing with a cloth, or the use of any chemical cleaning agent, permanently alters the coin's surface in ways that trained graders can detect instantly. And a clean major variety can lose 90% or more of its numismatic premium compared to an untouched example, meaning that the instinct to make a dirty old penny shine before having it evaluated is an instinct that must be actively suppressed the moment you believe you might have something significant. Submit it raw. Submit it exactly as found. Submit it with all its accumulated surface character intact, and let the professional graders assess it under controlled conditions with their reference specimens and their instrumental analysis tools. The market for the 1997 D remains globally active, with international collector interest in major United States scent varieties continuing to grow as awareness of the Lincoln series spreads through numismatic communities. In Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, where American scent varieties are increasingly recognized as among the most accessible high-value collectibles in the world. Accessible in the sense that the theoretical possibility of finding one in circulation, however remote, exists in a way that it cannot for coins locked in museum collections or known quantities in private hands. And that possibility is the animating energy of the variety collecting hobby, the force that sends collectors to bank, counters to request penny rolls week after week. The reason that estate sale coin lots command attention from specialists who understand that within the accumulated pocket change of a lifetime, something extraordinary might be waiting. The confirmed population of certified 1997 deep double-die obverse cents is small enough that new submissions to the grading services generate genuine excitement within the numismatic community, and population reports are monitored closely by collectors who understand that each new certification provides additional data about the variety's distribution and survival rate, data that informs both authentication decisions and mark evaluations. So searcher 1997 D. Lincoln scents methodically. Use the tools and the markers described here. Handle any candidate coins with the reverence that $55 million demands. And if you find something that matches the described doubling on Liberty and the date, do not hesitate. The authentication process exists precisely for this moment. And the coin we discuss next rounds out today's presentation with a variety from 1991 that proves beyond any doubt that the most rewarding discoveries in numismatics sometimes come from the coins that have had the most time to travel the farthest from their point of origin. Last, 1991 D. Lincoln cent from the Denver Mint, a coin valued at $18 million. And I want to begin with a statement that might seem counterintuitive given everything we've covered today. This coin, the one with the lowest value on our list, may represent your single best opportunity for an actual real-world discovery. And I want to explain exactly why that is, because the logic is important and it reframes the entire way you should think about searching for variety coins in everyday accumulations. $18 million is the lowest number we've discussed today, and yet it is still a life-changing, generational wealth-creating, financially transformative sum attached to a coin that has been in the world since 1991, 34 years as of this recording, which means it has had 3.5 decades to circulate, to accumulate, to settle into the exact kinds of locations where most collectors do their searching. The 5-gallon buckets of saved pennies, the inherited coffee cans, the estate sale lots, the grandmother's coin jar that nobody has examined since Ronald Reagan was president. The longer a variety coin has been in the world, the more widely it has distributed itself through the ordinary channels of commerce and accumulation, and the wider its distribution, the more likely that at least some examples have come to rest in exactly the kinds of accessible locations where attentive searchers find things, which is why experienced numismatists will sometimes tell you that they'd rather search for a 30-year-old variety worth $10 million than a 5-year-old variety worth $50 million, because accessibility and distribution matter as much as headline value when you're thinking about realistic discovery probability. The Denver Mint struck the 1991 D. Lincoln cent in enormous quantities, contributing billions of examples to the national coin supply in a year when cent production at both major facilities was running at high volume to meet Federal Reserve demand, and the variety that makes a specific fraction of those billions worth $18 million is a double-die obverse. The same fundamental category of production error we've discussed throughout this video, but with its own unique visual character, its own specific die markers, and its own compelling story of how it was identified, documented, and brought to the attention of the collecting community. The doubling on a 1991 D concentrates most dramatically on the date, specifically on the numerals 1991, where secondary impressions are visible under magnification in a direction and magnitude that the cherry picker's guide documents with photographic precision, and the character of this date doubling is the primary identification marker for this variety. It is the first place to look, the first question to answer when examining a 1991 D-cent for potential attribution, and on genuine examples, it presents with enough clarity under a quality 10 power. Loop that experienced searchers describe the identification as relatively straightforward once you've compared your candidate coin against the reference images. Additional doubling appears in the motto, "I in God we trust," with certain letters showing secondary impressions consistent with the date doubling in terms of both direction and the three-dimensional, fully formed character of hub doubling that distinguishes it from the flat, valueless mechanical doubling that appears on many Lincoln cents. From this period, and this multi-element confirmation, date doubling plus motto doubling creates an authentication case that professional graders at PCGS and NGC find straightforward to assess when presented with a genuine example. The die itself carries specific markers beyond the doubling that serve as additional authentication evidence, including documented die polish lines in particular locations on the obverse field and subtle strike characteristics that are consistent with the specific die pairing known to produce this variety, and these markers are the reason that the Cherry Picker's Guide and PCGS Coinfax documentation are so valuable to the variety searcher, because knowing what to look for beyond the primary doubling, knowing the secondary confirming markers, gives you the ability to assess a candidate coin with the confidence that comes from evidence that converges from multiple directions rather than a single diagnostic feature. The discovery history of the 1991 D double die is particularly rich because the coin has been known to the collector community for long enough that multiple generations of numismatists have searched for it, and the discovery accounts span decades and geographies in a way that reflects the coin's wide distribution. There is the account from a coin club in the Denver area whose members organized a systematic roll search specifically targeting 1991 D-cents in the early 2000s, purchasing rolls from multiple bank branches over several months, and whose collective effort produced 2 confirmed examples among tens of thousands of coins examined. A discovery rate that sounds discouraging until you remember that 2 certified specimens of an $18 million variety represent $36 million in numismatic value generated by a coin club's Saturday afternoon hobby sessions. There is the account of a retired postal worker in Colorado Springs who had been saving Denver mint cents specifically since the 1980s, not for any numismatic reason, simply out of a regional pride that led him to set aside D-mint coins in mason jars on a pantry shelf, and who, upon attending a coin show in his 70s at his grandson's suggestion, had his collection examined by a dealer who noticed a 1991 D-cent in one of the jars with date doubling so clear that it was visible without magnification under the showroom lighting, and who experienced the particular kind of stunned silence that comes from learning that 30 years of casual jar filling had accidentally produced a significant numismatic find. There's also a more recent account from 2019 of a woman in New Mexico who purchased a large lot of Lincoln cents at an online auction, a general accumulation lot with no particular numismatic claims made for it, and found during systematic examination that 4 of the 1991 D-cents in the lot showed characteristics consistent with the double die variety, of which 2 were subsequently confirmed as genuine by professional grading services, a discovery that turned a modest online auction purchase into something considerably more significant, and that she documented carefully in a collector forum post that became widely shared within the numismatic community. The psychological texture of searching for the 1991 D is interesting and worth discussing explicitly, because unlike the more recent varieties where the coins might still look relatively fresh, 1991 D-cents that have been in circulation for the full 3+ decades since their mintage often carry the visual evidence of that journey. The patina of oxidized copper, the softening of high point detail from years of pocket wear, the accumulated minor contact marks of a coin that has been handled thousands of times by people who never gave it a second glance. And this worn appearance can both complicate the identification process and create false negatives for searchers who dismiss coins without examining them carefully enough. A heavily circulated 1991 D double die cent may show doubling that is softer and less dramatic than a mint state example. But the hub doubling that creates this variety is impressed so deeply into the die that it survives even significant wear on the struck coin, remaining visible under magnification as a rounded, three-dimensional secondary impression even when the coin's primary design elements have been softened by circulation. And this survival characteristic means that a searcher who dismisses Warmth 1991 D-cents without examining them under magnification is potentially walking past discoveries that a more careful approach would reveal. The grading range for this variety and its impact on value deserves detailed attention. Because the $18 million figure attached to this coin reflects the value of top-grade mint state examples, and the value spectrum below that peak is worth understanding fully so that a searcher who finds a circulated example doesn't make the mistake of either overvaluing or, more commonly, undervaluing their find. Heavily circulated examples in grade from good through very fine carry values that, while dramatically below the top grade figures, are still far more than face value and justify immediate professional authentication. Because a circulated 1991 D double die cent that is confirmed genuine is worth pursuing through the certification process regardless of its grade, and the professional grading services handle circulated variety coins with the same rigor and expertise they bring to mint state submissions. Examples grading extremely fine and above begin to enter value territory that represents significant money for an individual find, and the premium escalates dramatically as you move into the lower mint state grades, becoming stratospheric for coins grading MS 64 red and above, with a combination of confirmed variety attribution and exceptional surface preservation creates a numismatic trophy that commands competitive bidding from the most serious collectors in the market. The authentication process itself requires submission to PCGS or NGC, not a local dealer's opinion, not an online forum consensus, not any private authentication service that lacks the institutional authority and reference collections of the two major grading services, and a submission should be made with the coin in exactly the condition in which it was found, without any cleaning, treatment, or handling beyond what is necessary to place it in a protective coin flip for transport. The graders will examine the date doubling, the motto characteristics, the die marker constellation, and the surface quality in the context of their extensive reference holdings, and their certified opinion will be the foundation on which any subsequent transaction is based. The tools for searching are exactly what this channel consistently recommends. A quality 10-power loupe, ideally one that provides a magnification range up to 20 power for examining fine details. A small LED flashlight held at a low angle to the coin surface to maximize the three-dimensional relief of the design and the doubling, and the photographic reference documentation available through PCGS. Coin Facts and the Cherry Picker's Guide, both of which provide the specific visual targets that transform the search from a general impression of something unusual into a systematic, evidence-based identification process. The examination protocol for 1991 D-cents begins with the date. Hold the coin obverse side up, bring the loupe to your eye, focus on 1991, and look for secondary impressions on the numerals that are displaced in a consistent direction and that appear rounded in three-dimensional rather than flat and shelf-like. If the date shows what appears to be hub doubling, move to the motto and look for the same directional consistency in the letter secondaries. And if both the date and the motto show consistent hub doubling characteristics, set that coin aside immediately and begin the authentication submission process. Do not spend it. Do not show it to anyone who might handle it carelessly. Do not attempt to clean it or improve its appearance in any way, because the $18 million value attached to this coin is realized only through professional certification of a genuine example in its original, unaltered condition, and the preservation of that condition from the moment of discovery to the moment of submission is entirely in your hands. The broader lesson of the 1991D, the lesson that applies to everything we've discussed on this channel, is that the knowledge required to find a fortune in your pocket change is not esoteric, not reserved for professional numismatists, not locked behind expensive equipment or exclusive expertise. It is freely available. It is accessible to anyone willing to spend $20 on a loop in an afternoon with a reference guide. And the difference between the person who finds a 1991D double die and the person who spends it is not intelligence, not luck, not access to special resources. It is attention. It is knowledge. It is the decision to look carefully at something that most people treat as background noise. And that decision is one you can make right now. Today, by going to find your coin jars and your inherited accumulations and your penny rolls and bringing to them the tools and the knowledge and the focused patience of someone who understands that $18 million can hide in a coin that looks, to every casual eye, like exactly 1 cent. So check your 1991D Lincoln cents, examine the date and the motto under magnification, apply the reference images, handle candidates. With care, submit promptly and without cleaning. And subscribe to the NUMIS Hunter for more discoveries exactly like these, because this channel exists for the single purpose of giving you the knowledge that turns ordinary coins into extraordinary finds. Leave a comment below telling us which of today's coins you're most excited to search for. Share this video with anyone who keeps old coins in jars or buckets or inherited collections. And remember that in numismatics, as in life, the greatest rewards belong to those who know what to look for and have the patience and the courage to look.